Okay, good evening, everyone. We're live, I think. So, questions and answers. Our website's been having some trouble, so apologies for that. And much gratitude to the people who, no one has gotten paid, as far as I know, to make this website and to keep it running. We have volunteers in Germany, Australia, America, and probably many other places who have kept and gotten this website going and kept it going. So it's kind of amazing, really. We're not some powerful corporation with money and resources. Just a bunch of volunteers keen on mindfulness. So thank you to all of them. Much blessing. So now we're going on to questions. I don't think it's working perfectly yet. I still see a spinning wheel here, but I do see questions. Oh, I'm supposed to start this. It's too late now, isn't it? I'm supposed to start the other. I don't think it's going to be on time. Better late than never. Okay, we now have an audio stream as well, which somehow syncs the questions. But I don't think that's going to work anyway because the website's not, the buttons aren't working. Anyway, none of that really matters. It's a sign of impermanence, uncertainty, and non-self, suffering, our inability to control. I don't probably bring up the three characteristics enough on my talks and on the internet. Something that we should always keep in mind. I do talk to meditators about them. Impermanence, uncertainty, because we're fixated on stability, trying to have things be constant, trying to find this state that's going to just last. Satisfaction. We're trying to find satisfaction, so teachings on suffering are important. And by suffering, it's just a word, it's the label we use. We really just mean it unsatisfying. So suffering is unsatisfying, but there's a lot of things that are unsatisfying. Pleasure is also unsatisfying. Right? It doesn't last. It doesn't satisfy you. And non-self. Yes, Buddhism does deny the belief that there is a self in this or in that. But more to the point, it's because we cling to things as being me and mine and under my control. And so to understand, but also to see, and more importantly, really to see through our practice that even our own bodies and minds aren't under our control. It's very important. It's important to keep these in mind also when you're asking questions. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? Often the answer is that it's what you're experiencing is what you're supposed to experience, and trying to do something is denying the fact that it's a problem, right? It's not something you can fix. It's not under your control. And simply seeing that, rather than trying to fix it and find a way to get back to the way you used to be, is an important part of the change of enlightenment. Stop trying to control the world outside, but also control your own mind. So that's the first question we have tonight. Got a lot of upvotes. Good question, but I think it's fairly easily answered. So, how to develop more stable mindfulness? So, without going on to the rest of the question, that is an important aspect of it. And there's really no answer that I can give that's going to satisfy. The answer is to practice more and more intensively as best you can when you have a chance. But then you talk about remedying getting lost in thoughts and fantasies, and how it seems like it's going on without any improvement. There's no progress, even the opposite. The tendency to drift after a couple of moments or minutes seems to be reinforced. So part of that is that, yes, you have to practice more and potentially more intensively. But a bigger part of what you're seeing, why you say it's not getting better, because Vipassana, in some sense, is not about seeing it get better. It's about seeing how bad it is. It's about seeing how broken it is. The system is broken and you can't fix it. You can't fix your mind. But when you see, and the more you see how broken the mind is, and how the whole system of how the mind works and how karma works and everything is irreparably broken, the less concerned you get about it. Oh yes, my mind is wandering. Before that would make you very angry. Now you see that it's wandering, and you get less angry. Why? Because, well, you see that you can't control it. You see that getting angry about it doesn't help. You see that really the real problem, or the much bigger problem, is that I'm getting angry. Much more roundabout than saying, how do I say? So I don't know what you're seeing at your end, but this is what I've got. How should I approach the knowledge that comes out of my practice? Well, the Buddha said you should approach it like a raft. A raft is something that helps you get across a difficulty, a body of water. But once you've gotten across that body of water, in other words, the knowledge was useful, the knowledge was a good thing, you don't carry the raft with you. So don't carry the knowledge with you. Knowledge is good, it's something that improves you, but knowledge comes from practice. So the real improvement doesn't come from the knowledge, it comes from the practice. The knowledge is the improvement. If you stop practicing, the knowledge just stops coming. You stop improving. So knowledge is something to be noted and discarded, really. I mean, if it's real knowledge, it will stay with you. It won't just disappear. A lot of long questions tonight, so I'm trying to summarize them. Sensual and sexual. Not really sure what the question is. How is one to manage the intoxication of fever? Right now, the only way I know to deal with it is intense mindfulness, formal meditation, and weakened defilements. Reminding myself of how foreign, strange, and gross the body really is, but my practice is imperfect, so it ends up returning. So really, and there's another question, or another couple of questions about this sort of topic, and we have to separate the sort of the stages of the path, or the stages of defilements. The worst defilements are things like, well, are things that lead you to kill and to steal and to lie and to cheat and to, well, those four really. If you can stay away from those, if you can overcome the will to do those, you've really crossed the first obstacle. If you want to get deeper and overcome sexual desire entirely, it's a much more drawn out process, but it's generally the process you embark upon after you've set yourself straight in terms of things that are really evil. So what I've told people in this video that actually got quite a lot of views was, the first thing I said was that you should stop feeling guilty, so guilty about sexual desire. I mean, it's not our first, it's not the first obstacle. Now you read the Buddha talking a lot about it, because the Buddha's talking endgame, and he's talking often to monks who they've gotten that far and they're trying to go further. Often these would be people who are on the brink of it. You know, he would be talking to anagamis in some of these talks. Sometimes he would be talking to arahants, and it was a means of edifying them and broadening their knowledge. It's not to say that part of the path isn't overcoming sexual desire or sensual desire. I mean, it's one more thing that we see is actually not satisfying, and it's not leading to true happiness. But it's not where you should start and say, oh me, oh my, here I'm starting to meditate, but I have all these lustful thoughts. Well, just be mindful of them and don't beat yourself up over them. Learn about them as part of who you are, as part of your mental makeup. Because all of that is going to get you over the first obstacle, which is wrong view. The wrong view that thinks, yes, sensual desire is satisfying, that this is the way to find real happiness, or that there are things that are stable and permanent, or that I am in control, there is a self, there is me, there is mine. Because that really is what disappears and what you can really and truly eradicate relatively quickly if you're intensive in the practice. And once you've gone there, well, then it's just a matter of working and working and training and refining your insight. And the more you refine your insight, the more clearly you see things, the more these things like sexual and sensual desire disappear or well, weaken stage by stage. Everything in the universe, is everything in the universe connected in one way? Is it true that what we think our minds send positive and negative waves in the universe? Yes, I'd say to some extent. The waves is a bit of a overstatement. It's not that we send positive and negative waves. It's that our minds, our actions have consequences, and those consequences are going to have other consequences, and so on and so on. So there's that connection. I mean, there are many connections. Everything in the universe, there's gravity, which is a physical connection, but the mind is similar. There's this connection between things. It's very complicated, and I wouldn't talk about negative and positive waves. Oh, maybe it's okay to talk about it as waves, but all that means is consequences and consequences, and that's kind of like a wave, right? I just don't want you to think of like vibes. Like if I sit and send love to someone, it's going to go out as vibes. I'm not of that school of thought, but there are consequences to your love, and that's going to have ripple effects, which is a wave. So yeah, okay. When meditating and lust arises, is it acceptable to quickly go through the 32 parts of the body to straighten the mind out? Or should you just note them, stay with the sensation of lust as your object? So use the 32 parts of the body as you like. I would recommend, and you don't have to follow my recommendation, your situation is yours, but I would recommend to use it when it's extreme, when you feel like you just can't be mindful anymore. Then sit down and have yourself a good talking to. Go through the 32 parts, even read through the Visuddhimagga if you like, because it goes into great detail, and sort of remind yourself that, look, this is foolishness. Get yourself some confidence and then go back and meditate mindfully again. That would be my recommendation. And this is another masturbation one. Mindfully observe yourself when you have an urge, a sexual urge. Been trying to suppress instead of understand. So my question is, why is it that the Buddha, so this I was trying to answer this, why is the Buddha insistent that serious practitioners become monks? So when you, as a monk, you're not about suppressing your sexual desires. It is about learning about them, but it's also about secluding yourself, because surrounded by temptation, it's not the best place to learn. It's not the best place to objectively observe these states. It's like an alcoholic. Well, they want to come to terms with their alcoholism and accept it, but you don't accept it by going to a bar and drinking every night. Sensual desire weakens the mind. It weakens your clarity. It muddles the mind, and it reinforces the urge. It reinforces the addiction. So when you come even just to a meditation center, you find how peaceful it is and how much um, it's the same idea. A meditator here who's gone through the course, I think, would very much likely tell you they didn't repress anything or much at all. Or there was a lot maybe that they couldn't handle, but there was much that they brought up, and it was mostly about dealing with and coming to terms with all of these things. Now, of course, you don't come to a meditation center for one course and cut it all off, but you do come to terms with some of the most gross desires and so on. And so being a monk is just extending that and trying to progress over time. It's really, your question is, the answer to your question is about the intensity, that you can intensify your practice, and there's intensity and something can be intensive, meaning always. It doesn't have to be intense, but there's both. There's the intensity and the intensification. Is that a different word? No. Being intensive, being constant is also important. So just living as a monk is useful because you're constantly reminded of good things. But the point is, there's no better way to come to terms with all these things than to become a monk and deal with your own mind rather than get caught up in sexuality and so on. Could you explain the difference between the Buddha and Arahants in the Pali Canon? Is the Bodhisattva path more noble than going straight to Nibbana in the suttas? So you want to pin me down. You don't just want my take on things. You want me to appeal to the suttas. Well, I'm not a scholar, so I shirk my duty to be completely knowledgeable and remember this sutta says this, that sutta says that, because that would take me some effort. And I'm not going to do that. But I will sit here and think for you. I won't just answer, I will sit and think. We do have some places where the Buddha calls himself an Arahant. We have one place where the Buddha says the only difference is that he became enlightened first. So, and what that means from a Theravada point of view, which often refers to commentaries, not just the suttas, is that the most important parts of enlightenment are shared by a Buddha and an Arahant, and that is freedom from suffering. So freedom from suffering is the goal. The Buddha said, I teach suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering. That makes it pretty simple. So if you, that being said, the leeway exists in whether you want to follow the Buddha's path to freedom from suffering. Right? Some people say, okay, you teach those 4 things. I'm going to go on and teach those 4 things in the future, because in the future, there will be people who want to become free from suffering as well. And so I will undertake to be what you are in the future. But it would be ridiculous to say, hey, everyone should do that. Because if everyone did that, what use would it be? Everyone said, no, I'm not going to practice the teachings, I'm going forward. Well, what good would a Buddha be then, if they're the ones who teach everyone to become free from suffering, if no one became free from suffering? And the other thing, sorry, I'm getting off track. I'm not really talking from the suttas at that point. But the other thing, and so, okay, I'll try and keep it to the suttas, is that in the suttas, there's very, very, very little said about becoming a Buddha. There's talk about how our Buddha became a Buddha. There's talk about other Buddhas. But there's very little talk. There certainly is never in the Theravada suttas any advice by the Buddha where he says, hey, you should try and become a Buddha. There's nothing like that. I think there's 1 or 2 places where he points someone out as being a bodhisattva, but I think it's usually in the commentaries. I can't even think of a place in the actual suttas, but of course I'm not a scholar. It gets mixed up for me what's in the commentaries and what's in the suttas in regards to things that happened, right? We have stories, but how many of those stories are actually in the suttas and how many of them are in the commentaries? Most are in the commentaries. But there's I think what I was going to say, and it's not explicitly stated in the suttas, but there's a sense that you do get certainly from the suttas that becoming a Buddha is a very, very difficult thing. It's not a thing for most people to aspire to, even in some future existence. And I think for the very reason that one Buddha helps so many people. So the ratio there among spiritually advanced people on the path to become enlightened, because the beings who are not even close to the path to become free from suffering are far, far, far more. But among those small group of people, tiny group of beings who are keen to become enlightened and who have the capacity to become enlightened, only one is a Buddha. Right? So it's not recommended for most people. It's something that only a very, very special being. And you talk about how only a special being should ever think to become a Buddha. And then you get a lot of people thinking, I'm a special being. And that's cool. That's great. I mean, it's good. I hope you are. But I'm often skeptical because I think there are far more people who think they're a special being than there are people who actually are that special being. There's in the commentary, and I brought this up before, in the commentary on the commentary, which talks about how our Buddha got the confirmation that he was going to become a Buddha. Or some commentary says, but wait, weren't there other people that saw the Buddha who thought, I want to become a Bodhisattva? I want to become a Buddha? And the answer is, yes, there were many. And I think the commentary actually claims that there wasn't one person in the crowd who didn't think, maybe I should become a Buddha. But none of them had the potential. None of them got the confirmation like this one Sumedha did. Put things in perspective, I guess, is my advice. If you're going to become a Buddha, that's the most awesome thing you could ever possibly do. Most people will never make it. That's my opinion. And it's backed by, it's not explicitly stated in the suttas, it's certainly backed by them and backed by the commentaries. So I hope that was useful. Or at least thought-provoking, maybe. I hope it didn't provoke too much thought. I can imagine what the comments are on YouTube. I won't even look. Do you have any advice for a 2-week-long intensive meditation practice with the aim of replacing sleep with meditation for that period? Oh boy. What do you think, Ricardo? 2 weeks without sleep? 2-week-long intensive practice with the aim of replacing sleep. Some people do it. There's stories of people who do it for months. You need to be in a very refined state to be able to do that. So my advice, get into a very refined state before you even think to attempt such a thing. Why? Because if you're not in a maybe you are, maybe you're a very refined sort of individual, but if you're not, it's going to be hell and it could be even deleterious to your mental well-being because you'll develop bad habits. You need to be in a fairly stable place to be able to benefit from that, in my opinion. So that's my advice. I wouldn't give more advice because I don't know whether you are at that state yet. And I wouldn't want to assume that you are, even if you told me you are, because you're not under my tutelage. So that's all I can say about that. Being mindful while using the computer, tablet, smartphone. Try not to use it while you're still training. And once you've already trained, well, then it should just be clear to you how you should have to do it because you developed the skills. As with anything that's inherently absorbing, of pulling the mind. You have to step back from it. You have to engage with it and not be mindful, but then be mindful when you have a chance to step back and see how you're feeling. How is your neck? How is your posture? How are your hands and fingers, and cramping and so on. Here's the question of the week. This one's got to win some sort of award, prize. I'm not mocking. I really think so. This person has read something I wrote 9 years ago. And so my first thought is, oh my, you're going to hold me to something I said 9 years ago. But I looked at it, and it's my short explanation on my take on things, because that's the thing with religion. It develops stories. We tend to romance things, and everyone gets a story. All of our teachers have biographies that are often romanticized. We have lineages, and we like to tell our lineages about our teachers and their teachers and things they did. We have stories that we tell, but we often lose, or we not often, we sometimes lose the truth in doing so. So I tried to set some of the little things straight, and I may have also had my own agenda in writing that. I mean, at least insofar as I don't approve of everything that goes on at any meditation center. I mean, I don't even suppose I'd approve of everything that we do. So I don't think we're perfect by any means. But um, I try, and I guess I've been discouraged from getting involved in various meditation centers because of the problems that I've seen. And so, I mean, then the question goes, well, aren't I just going to have problems of my own? And that's quite possible. Um, I've always, I think something that I haven't, well, if you read that article, it was interesting to me to write it because I really strongly approve of the way Ajahn Tong teaches. Having seen at least the way a couple of other systems do a similar meditation technique, I really approve of the way Ajahn Tong does it. I mean, that's why I've stuck with it for so long. And so that's really the biggest criticism. And it's not a criticism, it's just a reason why I'm not fond, or I'm not keen to encourage going to various centers, including the ones I mentioned in that list. So my agenda is to point out the differences. It was at the time. I mean, this is 9 years ago, and I think part of that is because of how important to me Ajahn Tong's way of teaching is, and how I felt that some people there's other ways of teaching similarly and taking from his teachings but adapting it. And I've seen one sort of adaptation that's become quite strong, and that's one of them I talked about. And so those people are adhering, it seems, fairly strongly to that style. And it's similar. It's very similar. It's quite similar. I might say it's almost the same, but I don't like to go that far. I feel there's a distinction, and I wanted to make that distinction so people wouldn't say this is Ajahn Tong's teaching, because for a few years I practiced with a group of these people and had a challenge. It was challenging trying to understand how it was that they were teaching, and or put the practice together in a system. And when I went to sit with Ajahn Tong and learn his way, it just fell into place, and everything was 1, 2, 3, 4, simple and perfect, And then he'd bring up the Buddha's teaching, this quote, that quote, he brought everything together for me. It was magical and almost. I mean, I'm not saying he's unique. I'm just saying for me it was eye opening. And so, without going into detail about what you're asking, because that's talking about individuals, which is never a great thing to do. I mean, it puts me in a position where I don't think I should talk about places and people and so on. But I do think, I mean, I try, so what I was trying to say, how I counter the criticism, aren't I corrupting things, is that I stuck to what Ajahn Tong teaches. There are other ways that I've learned. I said, no, I'm going to take it as best I can, the way Ajahn Tong teaches. Now, what I've seen elsewhere is someone adapted it, and everyone else is following that. Small adaptations, not great adaptations, but some of the things I don't agree with. So, and then there are other people who I do see are teaching some fairly strange things. That being said, every teacher is going to change things a little bit. The way I teach, the way I speak is nothing like the way Ajahn Tong speaks or teaches in these situations. I'm teaching to a Western audience. I think Ajahn Tong would take a look at all these questions and just close his eyes and fall asleep maybe, and just have no interest in this. I mean, he's very tired, or he was when I was with him, because he worked so hard. And he was getting old. But he also didn't have time for speculation. So I've tried my best to follow that and not encourage speculation. But I certainly put my own spin on things. But in terms of the details, I stick to what Ajahn Tong teaches. I don't think that's entirely true. I mean, there's a couple of details that I disagree with, and there's other groups that just seem to be fairly loose with the way they run things. And some just bizarre things I've heard, but a lot of it's hearsay. So mostly that's the thing, is I'm not in touch with all these groups anymore, so I don't have I don't have deep information about them. Not great things. I don't have deep information about. I don't have a lot to say about these places. I just don't know what's going on there. Can you say when the next 6-month service period starts, and if there is a way to apply? I'm interested in serving after I come to meditate next month. Javen, when are you leaving? Are you leaving? Are you staying?
I think September.
You're leaving in September.
Yeah.
So we have a steward until September, at least, probably, unless he or I dies before then, which could very well happen. If he or I dies, we don't have a steward. Other than that, we're probably okay. Bhante, once you said the position in Vipassana meditation was not so important. Does it mean there's not a problem to put one's back against the wall? Yes, that's what it means. So why you wouldn't, if you can, you're better off not, for the simple reason that it'll keep you more awake. But is that a huge reason? Is that a great concern? I don't think so. I mean, you'll just have to adapt. If you're sitting against a cushion, you're much more likely to. You're generally more likely to fall asleep or to drift. So you're much more alert. You're somewhat more alert when you're sitting upright. That's the only distinction. There are many cases where people feel compelled through back problems or just intense pain to sit with their back against something. I think more people do it than need it, from what I've seen. So I would encourage you to try not to, not you particularly, but in general, people try to sit cross-legged without leaning against anything. But certainly it's not against the rules to lean against anything. And so there we go. That's all the questions that I have. The page is not working at all, but I got through all the questions. So we're good. Are we still live? How's YouTube doing? Oh yes, chatting up a storm. You chat too much, YouTube. Look at, you should take notes from all my meditators here, sitting quietly, only answering when speaking when spoken to. Oh, I don't mind. Do as you like. That's all for me. I'm out. Have a good night. Thank you all for tuning in.